Louise Harbecker was born April 14, 1935. Roy and Myrtle Harbecker became parents for the first time. She was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. At the age of 12, Lois accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as her personal Savior. Hello, Lois.
Hello.
Lois, you enrolled as a freshman at Messiah College in Grantham, Pennsylvania. And since this was only a junior college then, you transferred to Greenville College for your junior and senior years. It was during those years that the Lord spoke to you about service with the churches of God in foreign lands. You majored in elementary education, is that correct?
Right.
And you taught for a year, and then you sailed for East Pakistan in 1958. Would you tell us about your service to the Lord in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh?
Yes, I'd like to. It was in the fall of 1958 that I left for what was then East Pakistan. 2 busloads of friends and relatives went to New York to say goodbye. As I got on the ship, I knew it would be a long journey, but yet I also knew that Christ was with me, for he had said, "Go ye into all the world, and lo, I am with you always." And so that 7 weeks on the ocean was a time of preparation for the years that I would be spending in East Pakistan. But it was good when I landed at the port of Chittagong to see Mary Hershey, who was a missionary from the Lancaster Church, and Hatem Dewan, who I would learn to know, there to meet me. We spent the night in Chittagong and then took a train to Bogra, where I would be staying for my first 3 years. This was the first of many train rides that I would take in East Pakistan. I was privileged to study language at Bogra with Hatem Dewan as my teacher. We had hoped that I'd be able to attend language school, but that wasn't possible. However, as I studied there at Bogra, I was able to learn to know the people, become acquainted with some of their customs, their ways, learn to eat their food, rice with my fingers, learn to wear a sari, and I made many friends there in Bogra. As you mentioned, I had majored in elementary education, and so a lot of my work during the time that I was in East Pakistan was with our mission schools. During the time of language study, after I finished language, 2 years of language study, passed the examinations that were required, I began to work with our school there at Bogra and also with the school at Sanahar. After 3 years of being at Bogra, I moved to Kanchanpur, where we had a boarding school and also a number of village schools. One of the other things that I had to learn when I got to East Pakistan was how to ride a bicycle. The Lancaster Church had given me a bicycle, and I can well remember how I came to the church and walked that bicycle home because I was afraid to try to get on. I had never learned to ride a bicycle, and so I was afraid to get on and ride home. But once I got to East Pakistan, it was necessary to learn not only how to ride the bicycle, but how to stay on when going through these narrow aisles that went through rice fields or the Acacia Church, and it usually took me about an hour to get there by bicycle. Because Pakistan was a Muslim country, most of my work with our village churches was Christian education with children and women. And so I would go to the Acacia Church each week and have meetings with the children there and with the women. After my first term in East Pakistan, when I came home for furlough, I attended Millersville State College and got my master's degree in education. I figured this would be helpful for me if the time should come when I would be returning to the States to teach, or also to help me in my work over there. After I went back to East Pakistan following my first furlough, I worked more with our boarding school, which we had at Kanchanpur, where I had been living. At first I used to go visit the village schools, but now I was involved with the boarding school, where we had about 150 students, both boys and girls, living there at Kanchanpur and attending our day school. It's a big responsibility to be parents to these children who come from various backgrounds. Some were from Christian homes, some were from Muslim homes, some were from Hindu homes. And I really enjoyed the time that I worked with these girls and boys, and also because of the fact that East Pakistan had been a colony under the British, English was a second language, and so I did teach school I taught English classes in school, also some Bible classes. But there were some special things that I remember about my time in East Pakistan. One of them was the women's retreat. Once a year, we would have meetings just for the women of our churches to come together at one village church. Many of them walked many miles to get there, and when they arrived, we'd give them a cup of tea and some puffed rice. Sometimes we had a special speaker from another church, or sometimes it was one of us missionaries who would have services with them. We had a noon meal of rice and vegetable-type curry. Then in the afternoon, we would meet again, and then before they went home, they'd get another cup of tea, and they'd take some puffed rice and tie it in the end of their sari, and then for their long walk home, they would have a snack for their way home. Some of the other things that I remember were singspirations on Sunday evening. Our church services were in the afternoon, and the boarding school boys and girls would come in. Not together, of course, because you're again a Muslim country. Everything was separate. The girls would come in one Sunday evening to sing, and then the next Sunday evening it would be the boys' turn to come in and sing. And one song they always liked to sing, they knew a few English songs. They liked to sing, oh no, it slips my mind, Jesus is Everything to Me. Christian holidays were special times too, and although they were observed a little differently than we would observe our holidays here, I remember the first Christmas I was there, the play that the young people put on. It was more like a variety show than what we would think of our traditional Christmas play, but to them this was a time when many non-Christians would come to church, and it was an opportunity for them to witness too. Also on Palm Sunday, the children would gather the palm branches, and singing Hosanna would walk around the church. Good Friday, the ladies gathered flowers and decorated a huge cross, just filled it with flowers. And then on Easter Sunday, they would make an open tomb and put it in front of the church. So these were all real special times, and I just thank the Lord for the years of service that He allowed me to have there in East Pakistan, where I was until 1971.
You left Bangladesh in 1971. How did God lead so you knew it was His will for you to leave?
It was in March of 1971 when things began to get a little uneasy politically. The Bengalis, or the people living in East Pakistan, had been responsible for bringing in most of the revenue for the country, but it was West Pakistan that had control of the government. And so it was in March of 1971 that the people of East Pakistan rebelled against the government, and civil war broke out. At that time, we had children in the boarding school. Communication, transportation were cut off. They weren't able to get back to their homes, many of them. And because of the situation, we felt that for their own safety, it was not wise that we should remain where we were. And so with our boarding children that we had left and with some of our staff, we went over to India, which was just a matter of walking a couple miles, and we had crossed the border into India. During this time, it's estimated that over 1 million people lost their lives, and about 10 million people had gone to India as refugees. We were very fortunate at that time because of the fact that our churches did have a mission in India at Uluberia, which was 20 miles from Calcutta. So after spending just about 2 weeks in a refugee camp, in a border town in India, we moved with the children that we had to our mission station at Uluberia. And Eunice Catlin, who had been stationed with me, working with me at Kanchanpur, was with me. We spent 3 months in India, and then it was that the Indian government would not grant us visas. They would not permit us to stay any longer. So we made arrangements. Some of the children we had placed with relatives, family members that we had been able to locate in India. And the ones that we had not placed, we put in boarding schools there in India before we left. We were sad to be leaving, but we had no choice, and we were just thankful that we had been able to provide for 3 months for some of their needs. Also, our churches during this time, through our mission in India, were able able to send relief money to the Christians that had gone into India at that time. But it was a situation, as it seemed that the Lord was closing the door. We had gone into India without any visas, and at the time, of course, didn't know if we would get back or what would happen to what was then the hope for Bangladesh.
So, Lois, you returned to the States then in 1971. And how did it happen that you felt called to Haiti?
It was while I was home in 1971, in the fall of the year, that I met with the Commission on World Missions, actually to hand in my resignation, because I knew I wasn't due for furlough at that time, and I just wasn't sure what the Lord's leading was. And as I met with the Commission, they asked me if I would consider going to Haiti for an interim period to see if the Lord would open the doors for me to return to Bangladesh at a later time. I had visited Haiti 2 years previous to this, and frankly at that time I didn't feel that the Lord was calling me to Haiti, but I was open to the Lord's leading. I wanted to do what He wanted me to do. I had given my life to His service, and so I agreed that I would go down to Haiti and help Mary Hershey. At that time, Mary, who was also from our Lancaster church, was working in Haiti with her nutritional centers and with the schools, and also serving as treasurer of the mission. They said Mary had a lot of work and she could probably use some help, so I agreed to go and at least help Mary. So the very day that Bangladesh became an independent nation, I left for Haiti on December 16th of 1971.
Then you began serving God as a missionary to Haiti in 1971, and you presently are serving as a missionary there now. What have been your areas of service in Haiti, Lois?
In Haiti, too, I can see how the Lord was preparing me for the work that I am doing there. Having been trained as a teacher, after 6 weeks of language study, I became involved with our school program there in Haiti, working as school administrator, supervising our school at Borel, and also our other mission schools. However, I enjoy teaching, I think, more than doing administrative work, and so I was happy that there was a time came when I was able to do some teaching in Haiti. As far as our school program is concerned, at the present time we have 4 schools, 4 elementary schools. We employ 32 teachers and have a student enrollment of about 1,200 students. As I said, I was more interested in teaching than administrative work, so I'm happy that during the last 2 years we now have one of our Haitian young people in charge of school administration, and I'm getting presently more involved with Christian education work. This too was the work that I felt the Lord was calling me to. In high school I had taken a commercial course which prepared me for a lot of office work, which I have done. Also, I was interested in accounting, and recently I have been serving as treasurer for our mission in Haiti. In the Lancaster church, I worked with the young people. I worked with junior church, and this was what I had hoped to get into. And now, as we are putting more emphasis on our Christian education program in Haiti, I am getting involved with this work at the present time, teaching Sunday school teachers how to teach children. And so it's really an opportunity, and I've enjoyed it. However, our work in Haiti is more than education. We are working not only in schools, but we have our church planning ministry. We have our medical work, and this has been a very important work. One of the big problems in Haiti is malnutrition with the children, and our nutritional center program has enabled many mothers to learn how to feed their children a balanced diet on a very small amount of money. The clinic also is meeting the needs of about 140 to 160 patients a day. We're thankful for the Haitian doctor that we have there, and one of our students is now a trained nurse working in the clinic, and also for American doctors that come down from time to time to help with our clinic work. In addition to the medical work, our church work, and our schools, we also have a community development program. We have worked in areas of helping to build latrines, helping the people to get good drinking water. This has helped to improve their health, helped to improve living conditions. Through a program with small animals, rabbits, chickens, goats, we've been able to also help them to get more protein into their diet. Also, it gives them some income. Vocational training programs where the girls have been taught sewing, boys have learned to do forging work, and welding has given young people a trade. And all these have been inroads which have helped us to not only meet some of their physical needs, help them to improve their living conditions, but it's also given us the opportunity to present to them the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, which is our main goal, is reaching the people of Haiti with the gospel of Jesus. And so it's just been good to be able to share with the people there and to tell them of the love. It's only as the love of Christ is seen in our lives that we are able to share it with others. And so I've just been thankful that the Lord has been able to use me to share his love with the people of Haiti as well as the people of East Pakistan.
Lois, when you went to Haiti, you found that French is the medium of education and Creole is the spoken language. Wasn't it in 1975 that the Lord directed you to Albertville, France, and you studied French there?
Yes, I did. This was something that was really a problem when I went to Haiti because I had had no French in school, and I was given charge of our school work. And at that time, French was the medium of the schools, and I knew no French. Creole was the spoken language, which I had learned, but I did not know French. So during my first furlough home from Haiti, I did go to Albertville. I spent 9 months studying French in Albertville. And I've always been thankful for that time. Although I don't speak French fluently, it has enabled me to understand French and to read it, and it's been a big help in the work with the schools.
As we close this interview, would you leave us with a verse that's meant a lot to you as a missionary?
Over the years, there have been lots of verses that have meant a lot, but this evening I'd just like to leave you with the verse that we find in John chapter 15, verse 16. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give you. And I think this has been a verse that's always meant a lot, and it's a promise too. I'm thankful that the Lord chose me. Not only did he choose me, but he gave me the promise that there would be fruit and the fruit would remain. And I think we've seen this as some of the young people, some of the children that I've worked with are now taking positions of responsibility in our mission. The fruit is remaining, and I'm just thankful for that.
Mary E. Hershey was born to Mr. and Mrs. Samuel B. Hershey on February 8, 1913. She was saved at the age of 11. Later, Mary went to Millersville Normal School and received her teacher's certificate in 1932. Mary, what other preparation did you make after you taught school for 5 years?
I went to Nyack Bible Institute, which is 29 miles up north from New York City. My uncle was, for 35 years, the Foreign Secretary of the Christian Missionary Alliance. My mother was a member of that church before we came to Lancaster First Church of God. And I knew it was a very fine Bible school, and that's the reason I chose it.
What led you into missionary work, Mary?
Well, Mrs. Mayer spoke at our church here in Lancaster, and I felt called then. And as we were going down the steps from the balcony, Dr. Yon said, you know, it'd be nice to go, and I said, I am, because I knew the Lord had called me. And then the church in Lancaster was wanting to support a missionary, and Pastor Yoda kept putting them off, because I don't know how he knew that the Lord had called me, but he said, you just wait and we'll have one of our own. So one day he came out to see me, and he said, Mary, I want a private talk with you. And then he asked me, and I said, but how do you know? I didn't tell anybody. Oh, he says, Mary, I know. May I use your name? And I said, no, not yet. And this is about after 5 years. I never had left home. And that's the reason I thought to go across the seas. I mean, that's terrible. So then, anyway, my father said to me, too, he said, you know, the church wants to support somebody. And Pastor Yoda always says, wait, there's somebody in our church. He said, do you know who? And I said, yes, your daughter. I said, do you have any objections? He said, no. Whatever the Lord would have you to do, that's all right with me. And when I told Mother, oh, she said, I knew that. And I said, well, how? She said, I dedicated you to be a missionary when you were born. Mother always wanted to be a missionary, and her parents didn't want her to be. They lived on a farm, and she was the oldest. There were 5 Christian people, and I guess that was the reason. So that's what Mother had done. So she just waited. She never told me.
And then you went to India as a missionary?
An educational missionary to take over the schools from Mrs. Mayers.
What were your first duties in India where you were stationed?
Naturally, to learn the language. Then you wish you could speak in tongues, you know. Well, anyway, the first year you study Bengali and you take a junior examination. And out of the first 12 months, 3 months, you're at the language school in Darjeeling. And I passed the junior examination and went on for the second year for the senior examination. And for the first time in my life, I failed. I didn't fail the whole examination, just the sermon. Well, you expect me to do that, wouldn't you? But anyway, interesting enough, that the committee, all of the missionaries went to pass me. And the head man of the YMCA said, no, I know missionaries. She'll get so busy in her work and she won't improve herself. So I think it failed me by 1/2 of 1% or something silly like that. And Glenn Alderson was terrible upset about it. And I said, no. So Pretty Babu said to me, Miss Ann, every Wednesday night you're going to take the prayer meeting. I said, okay. And the next morning you're going to tell me all my mistakes. Otherwise, I don't do that because what good would it do? This is what we did. And I went back for the first exam was in December, went back in April then. And I passed it with about double of the marks. So it shows that it proved. But when I went back, they laughed and said they couldn't stop me. What I'd done, I took examples that would fit any sermon. You never knew what you're going to get to talk on, you see. So praise the Lord for his help and the cooperation of the Bengalis.
And then when did you take your first furlough, Mary?
1943, during the war, and I said I wasn't going to come home. And the field council wrote home to the home board. And the home board said, no, we have a responsibility to the family. Mary comes home. And from that time on, I wasn't afraid. You had to wear your life-saving belt up the whole time, you know, have it beside you. And interesting enough, we came into port in California 8 o'clock in the morning, but about 4 o'clock in the morning, for the first time crossing the whole Pacific Ocean, we almost got a call to abandon ship. And they said, give us 3 more minutes. And we never got the call to abandon ship. That's how dangerous it was right close to our shores.
Did you receive any further training when you were on your first furlough?
Yes, I had a teacher's certificate that was a normal diploma to give me the authority that I could teach in any school in the United States. But now I wanted my degree, so went to Millsboro and got my bachelor's in science and education.
And did you receive any other further training throughout your years, your career?
Yes, after my second furlough then, I wrote home to Dr. Lefebvre, who's then pastor of the Lancaster Church as well as secretary of the home board. And I said, I've been out of the classroom so long, I either want to go back and teach a year that I'm home or else go on for my master's. And fortunately, he planned for me to go on for my master's because it made it easy then later on to build in a boarding school. Everything was under the East Pakistan government. Whether I wanted cement or bricks, it didn't matter what, I had to get permission from the government. And with only a bachelor's degree, which everybody else has over there, so many young people you know, they wouldn't have paid much attention to me. But with my master's degree, it wasn't anything that I asked for that I didn't get. So the Lord planned all this.
And Mary, how did it come about that you were asked to supervise the building of the boarding school then at Kanjampur?
Because it was only skirts then. I guess that's the answer. But it was because I had my master's degree. And Sikandar Babu, who is Manoj's uncle, was my right-hand man, and without him it would have been impossible to be done. And the Lord gave us a terrifically fine and honest Muslim contractor, and he and Sikandar saved the mission thousands of dollars.
You then served in India from 1937 to 1964.
India and East Pakistan.
India.
Okay.
You then served in India and East Pakistan.
Yeah, because after August the 4th, 1947, the northern part where we were in Boga district fell into East Pakistan.
Yes. Well, why did you then not return to India after 1964?
Well, missionaries should work themselves out of a job, and that's what I did. I knew if I went back, Manoj, whom we call sent to, he had his bachelor's degree, and beside that, a bachelor of teaching over there, which was all in English, and then his master's degree from Temple University, qualified the same as I was to fit right into being principal. And I placed him in principal January 1st, 1964, when I was called home on the 17th. And it was beautiful because had I been there, he would have felt that he would have had to do everything like this side did, you see. But then he was free to do what he knew what to do, and in his own land, in his own country. And so I knew if I went back, most likely he would leave and say, well, Miss Hershey's here, I'm not needed, and go into a lucrative government job. And by the way, he said that very statement on the pulpit right here in our Lancaster church when he was home last year. So that's the reason I applied then to the commission to go to Haiti, and I thought they couldn't use me there. All right, I'd go to the Navajo Indians. Then we didn't have work there, but the Lord led me to Haiti.
And then you did get transferred to Haiti, where you served from 1969 to 1979.
Right.
What were your duties when you were in Haiti?
Well, interesting enough, they said I'd be in charge of the schools. And of course, the first job again was to learn Creole. Now, Creole, they say, is a simple language. But they love proverbs, and they can lose you in 2 seconds using the proverbs, you know. But the language itself is really very simple. You're supposed to learn it in 3 months instead of 2 years. Well, I had August, and then September, Pastor Chapelet and I were registering over 500 kids for the school, and I didn't have too much time for study. And by the first week in October, I was asked to go into Port-au-Prince under the health department of the government for training for nutritional centers in French. Well, anyway, it's interesting how much you do understand the French when I had it back in high school. This sounds odd, but the Lord helped you through those situations. And so then I was in charge of both the schools and the nutritional centers. The hospital at Deschapelles had asked Pastor Wallace that they wanted to open nutritional centers in our area, but they felt that the mission should do it instead of them. But we had to work under their hospital in order to be recognized by the government to get food from Church World Service.
At what age were you required to retire as a missionary?
At the age of 65, but when I returned, they knew that I'd be 66, and so that was acceptable.
I see. Mary, it's hard for me to think of you as being retired, because I know that you maintain a very active schedule for the Lord. But what have you been doing since retirement from the mission field?
Well, like some people say, you're busier after you retire than before. I can't really say that, but I surely appreciate the fact of working for the church that supported me down through the years. And so now I'm Minister of Visitation and Chairman of the Missions Committee and teach a lawyer Sunday school class and fit in wherever anything is needed to be done.
From October 1937 to January 1964. She taught in the Christian day schools from 1964 to 1969. Then Mary served from July 1969 to July 1979 at Morel, Haiti, in the schools and the 3 nutritional centers there. She has just told you that she now serves as Minister of Visitation at the Lancaster First Church of God. She's also chairperson of the Missions Committee and teaches a Sunday school. Evelyn Shuey was born November 16, 1916, to Charles and Mary Shuey, who were members of the Progress Church of God. Evelyn was converted at 8 years of age and joined the Progress Church several years later. Evelyn, how did you receive your call to missions?
There were a series of situations in which I felt a warm feeling about going to the mission field, but there were some predominant ones. And when I was a teenager, Mrs. Cover was in my church, and she dressed me in a sari right in front of the whole congregation. Well, that left an impression on me, you can be sure. Several years later, the children's department was packing a box for Dr. Gilbert, and I felt a warm feeling about that. I went home that Sunday afternoon, and in prayer, I dedicated myself right in my home for full-time service. I needed an assurance from the Lord, and he gave it to me in Joshua 1:9. Have not I commanded thee? And he had several times at camp when I consecrated myself. Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. I claim that promise. The next morning, I resigned from the insurance office where I was working and served the time notice there.
Did you go to college then, Evelyn?
Yes, in 1944, 10 years after I had graduated from high school, I enrolled in Finley College. In my junior year there, I was writing a theme on the call of Isaiah. When I enrolled in the college, I thought of just any kind of Christian service. But as I was writing that theme, I had a feeling that the Lord wanted me to go to India. Well, at first, I was not willing. There were several ideas I put up before the Lord, and one was travel. I was afraid to travel that far. Then the Lord assured me that he is the Lord of the air and the sea, as well as the land for travel. That was all I needed. I accepted the call when he said, whom shall I send and who will go for us? I answered with Isaiah, here am I, send me. Then I felt a peace and joy that I did not have before.
Evelyn, after you received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Finley College, you went to Millersville State Teachers College. That was from 1948 to 1949. And there you received your certification for teaching elementary and secondary school, didn't you? Then, when did you leave for the mission field?
Well, in 1949, Beth Beers and I left together to go to East Pakistan, which was recently a new independent country disjoined from India. And there we had had Churches of God missions in Bogra district for a little over 50 years.
Yes, the mission work in that area is celebrating its 90th birthday now, this year. It started in 1898, and it was 90 years old this year in 1988. Evelyn, what was your first assignment?
Like for all of us, I studied the Bengali language. It took 2 years to become fluent. And while doing that, I had other opportunities of service, like supervising the housekeeping helpers and going out sometimes with the Bible women, teaching Sunday school classes with the children. And then in the second year, I was appointed as secretary of the field council.
And then what?
After 2 years in Kanchanpur, the mission decided to send me to Uluberia, India, because there was a need there. And going there, I was still secretary of the field council, but I also had charge of 3 schools and went out construction workers, and that wasn't so very easy. I was glad when Solomon took over that work with the men.
What were some of the spiritual highlights?
All along the way, we have happy spiritual experiences, but when we had revival meetings there in Udaberia, we had some astounding decisions, and even among the Christian community, some people were not sure they were saved, and then they became baptized and brought into the family of God. And then after 2 terms of service there, I came home for what we thought would be a 3-year furlough while Betty Howey took over the work in India. But, however, within those 3 years while I was in the States, Betty wrote to me that she had received permission from the home board, which was the mission board at that time, that she could remain in mission service if she married a national, Solomon Bishops. Well, that closed the door for me to go back to India, and I realized that she would stay there indefinitely, and also that the government did not want to increase the foreign missionary personnel.
Then you came back to the States, and so what were your opportunities of service back in the States?
Well, for 2 years I was in deputation. Then for several years I worked in the office of the Child Evangelism Fellowship. In 1968, I received the opportunity to teach in the Harrisburg Christian School. Now previously, before I had gone to India, I was in the Lancaster Christian School for several years. But in Harrisburg, I remained there for 5 school terms.
I know you spent some time in Bangladesh. How did that come about?
Oh, yes. While I was still teaching in the school, on Good Friday before Easter in 1972, while I had devotions, I again had that warm feeling about foreign mission service. I knew there was an opening in Bangladesh, which was the new name now for East Pakistan, where I had been before. And Pastor Lewis of the Lancaster Church was also chairman of the Commission on World Missions. So after the Easter service, I went and spoke to him. Well, he said there was a need for teaching the Branham children, and I certainly should apply for an application for a visa to return to the mission field.
When did you start teaching the Branham children?
Well, first of all, the Branhamans left in September, but I didn't get my visa until December. So Mrs. Brenneman started teaching Kevin, and I started teaching him after the Christmas and New Year's activities in the 2nd grade, which his mother had also started. But then there was another interesting thing in that time. Right after I arrived, Rhoda Kauffman was going to all of the outstations to take Bibles and clothing and blankets to the people who had fled to India during the war. This was right after the Civil War. And they didn't have these commodities, especially the Bibles. And it was a wonderful feeling to me to go along to all of the outstations and give these things to the people who needed them.
How many years did you teach Kevin?
I taught him for 4 years, which was to the end of his 5th grade. But within that time, the Binkley family arrived. So there was 1 year when we had 5 students instead of 2 students in the school. That was wonderful. Laurel joined Kevin in 3rd grade. Jeff joined Carol in 2nd grade for Mrs. Brenneman, and Mrs. Binkley taught Lisa. And then for the 5 students joined, coming to me in the morning for opening exercises, and then the last period of the day, they joined together for special classes, such as art, music, Bible, physical education, and science experiments. They really had a ball, especially when they had the closing activities, which was a circus, and it was a circus.
Then what did you do, Evelyn? During the school years, you met with a Bible woman and shared in church activities.
Oh,
didn't
yes.
you?
After the Brenneman family left, I became a teacher in the nurses training school, and also in the became business administrator in the hospital and curriculum coordinator in the nurses training school.
Then you were secretary and treasurer of the mission, and that required many hours of office work, didn't it? Were the Nationals serving then?
Yes, the Nationals were then in charge of the departments, evangelistic, educational, and medical. And yet they had me sitting in sometimes in consultation, and that was wonderful for a transition period for them to begin to take over the work. And yet I had opportunities for visiting in the nurses' hostel, in the hospital, and witnessing and giving out tracts, and also in the Christian community.
What were some spiritual highlights of that time?
Well, again, we had special meetings, and we had first-time dedications and also rededications, and we praised the Lord for these. Then I also went along to Bami Hall, and that was a Hindu village that was asking for Christian teaching. And so the inquirers were taught, they were baptized, and a new Christian church was established there. And that was a wonderful event by the grace of God.
I believe you also had another teaching experience over there, didn't you, Evelyn?
Yes. The Fortney family arrived in 1980, and the first year Marlene taught Heather, and I taught Pierre in his third grade. Then in the second year, Marlene taught both of the children, but I had occasional Bible classes with them.
I imagine you've had some unusual or fearful experiences. Would you tell us about them?
Yes, there were several. When I was in Ulibarria, I went by train to a little village of Amta to visit the school. One time I was on a crowded coach, and there were men and women and many standing, and the men were discussing news of the day. And it happened that America had given military aid to a country that they opposed. Well, their conversation got very loud and brawling, and I could feel that their glances were toward me. Perhaps they didn't understand that I understood what they said, that I understood the Bengali language. And I felt uncomfortable. But then I prayed much. And it was miraculous, the warm feeling I felt around me of the Lord's presence. And I really felt that He protected me at that time. Then there was another time in Dhaka, that was up in Bangladesh, when the assassination of the president, Mujibur Rahman, took place. And I heard the shots early in the morning. I thought it was just gunshots. Here it was really big military units that killed him and many members of his family. And then we received a phone call from the American consulate that we were not supposed to leave the house, and we were under house protection for several days. Then there was another time when policemen camped on our Boger compound, but all the time we felt that the angels of the Lord encamped around us and protected us.
Yes. Miss Evelyn Shuey is now retired. She's living in Millersville, Pennsylvania. She taught in the Christian schools in Lancaster and Harrisburg for 7 years. She served on the mission fields in East Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh for 24 years. And she's now the stateside prayer coordinator for Mission Nationals. Evelyn, when did you retire?
I retired in May 1983 from Foreign Service, but then I worked under the Commission on World Missions 1 year in Finley in the Archives Museum. That was a wonderful experience. And I praise the Lord for His faithfulness on the foreign field and for the opportunities He has given me here at home also. capitalism way there because it's warm.
Rhoda Kauffman is the daughter of Elizabeth and Chris Kauffman of Maytown, Pennsylvania. She's been a member of the Maytown Church of God since she was a child. Rhoda felt the call to mission work when she was a junior in high school. After high school graduation, she took her AB degree at Findlay College. It was wartime then, and traveling was hazardous. She took work at Millersville State Teachers College and prepared for elementary teaching. She taught second grade in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, while waiting to go to the mission field. Rhoda, would you tell us about your 16 weeks trip to India?
Well, yes, because of the war, we couldn't leave as we anticipated. But finally, in October of 1944, Eunice Kaplan and I were able to go. Eunice was disappointed she couldn't leave earlier, but we did go on a Portuguese ship and got over to Lisbon. Portugal was a neutral country, so we traveled on their ship, and they promised immediate connections. But when we arrived in Portugal, there were friends of hers still waiting who had sailed in August. So we had to wait 5 weeks longer, and then we finally got a ship, and they said, right through. Well, we stopped 8 times in Africa. The Suez Canal was closed, but it was most interesting to me, because when would I ever see Africa? Some of the other missionaries had been there for a long time, were going back, they were eager to get back, but I was enjoying every minute of it. We spent Christmas right on the equator. Santa had a hard time, a hot time. And in Africa, we stopped at these different places. One place we got off, got on a boat, went inland and saw the hippos and the alligators and the other animals in the river and out in the fields. It was great. We had services on the ship, and then sometimes we even had services in Africa with some of the other churches there in Africa. One missionary of the 71 of us disembarked in Africa, and the rest of us went on to India. Most of the Portuguese passengers got off in East Africa, and a lot of Indian families got on. Now, life changed. But that was my introduction to Indian culture. Finally, about February the 10th, we got to Goa in India. We went through customs, and that was a new experience for me. And crows everywhere. Noisy things, but I was reminded of the senior missionaries that they were good scavengers. So in Calcutta, we were met by our own missionaries, and Ulibarri was only 20 miles away. Eunice pointed out the station as we went flying by it on a through train. After a few days in Ulibarri and Calcutta, we went to Bogra, and finally we got to Kanchanpur, and there was Fern Wayne and the church people waiting to see us. We had a great time, and I remember that beautiful Japanese tea set that Fern used that day, and my welcome at Kanchanpur was great.
What did you do then in your early years in India?
My early years, well, the first thing was to learn the language. Because of the war, there was no language school. Fern had engaged a Hindu teacher from the local high school. He was supposed to come every day, but he didn't always make it because there are lots of Hindu holidays. Anyhow, we did the best we could. And I studied, and in December that year I tried the examination. I passed the oral part, but failed some written papers, so I had to do the whole thing over. Then the next year there was a 3-month language course in Darjeeling, and I was there with the Fredericks, and passed that exam, and then finally I passed the second examination. And while I was still studying and all of that, I was helping in Sunday school and helping with the Bible women and just getting experience, like that. Learning to use a language. It was a long, long struggle, let me tell you.
There was a missions Golden Jubilee, as I recall. Would you tell about the missions Golden Jubilee?
Yes, well, I forgot to tell you something else. Mary arrived then, before this Jubilee time. Mary arrived in India in 45. She had been down to Ulibarri, but she was sent to Kanchanpur the second term. So she took over all of the work there in Kanchanpur and out in the village area. The village area had always been supervised from Bogra. But it had come time for Fern to go home for her vacation, furlough, and time for the Covers to retire. So it seemed better because Bogra was 40 miles away, and we were right there. So anyhow, the work was put under Mary's hands, and she did a fabulous job. And while the Covers were there, they ordained a man who was a Muslim convert, had been a teacher for many years, and then he was given Bible training, and he became our first pastor, and the Covers also ordained a man in Boca to be the first ordained pastor there. So that was very fine. Mary even started one new school, and that was in 1947 out in one of the villages. And by 1949, the people, the adults of that area, were interested in becoming Christians, and they had been given teaching, and they were baptized in 1949. And wasn't it great? In 1989, grandchildren of those people were baptized at the time of the annual conference held right out there in that same village. We haven't started any new schools since 47 because government has been doing more in schools, but a number of new churches have been started other places. Then, about this Golden Jubilee, we see our mission work was started in 1898. And by 48, 50 years had passed. So we had a big to-do, and Dr. Lefevre and Reverend Carnock came out from the States to celebrate with us, and some of the local people, local missionaries and all those. And sometime in that same year, the first Shanga, or church union, was started. So our churches were being organized into their own conference.
Mary told something about the Kanjanpur boarding school. What are your early memories of the Kanjanpur boarding school, Rhoda?
Well, Fern had plans for a boarding school. She went home. Mary had plans for a boarding school. When the country was divided in 1947, then our part, Kanjanpur area, we all fell into the East Pakistan country. So first I went to India, but now I'm living in East Pakistan. The border between India and East Pakistan was quite open for some time. Mary was on furlough in 1953, and that border was closed. The youngsters could no longer go to boarding school down in Calcutta, so what to do? Had to have their education. So I emptied my office, moved my stuff all out, and we put 3 girls that just had to have boarding somewhere, put them in my office, spread their bedding on the floor. We made a temporary shelter for 5 boys and made cooking arrangements. That was the beginning of the boarding school. But Mary came back, and then things really happened. And she built up the building, and buildings and all of that. I wasn't helping too much then in the school area, but what was I doing? Well, I was helping with Christian Endeavor, and I was helping the children out in the village schools. And you know, after school, I often had children's meetings, just for the Christian children. And I was so pleased when some of those Hindu and Muslim children would also attend the meetings that I had after school. I was also helping with the women and going out with the Bible women or having women's meetings in the church. I remember having one Bible lesson in Isaiah. Imagine, not very much experience of teaching Isaiah to village women, but they were women that were quite mature as Christians. We really had a good time.
Well, Mary was busy in the boarding school program then, and we see what you were doing at that time. I believe there's a story told about you and the bicycle.
Well, I had to travel by bicycle all the time. Now, it was to my advantage that the country was level, but it was not to my advantage that we had the rainy season also. So at Luckma, I lived in one of the village houses at Luckma, and every place that I wanted to go to was on the other side of the Little Luckma River. It was just a little creek in Pennsylvania terms, but it was pretty big and pretty deep. And there was a bamboo bridge, one bamboo to walk on and one bamboo to hold on to. Now, I couldn't manage bicycle. I couldn't carry that bike across on that. So I paid a man from the village church there, and he carried my bike over every day. So this Saturday afternoon, he had carried my bike across, and I had a drawstring bag on my shoulder with my Bible school materials, another bag with my camera. I was wearing my sun helmet and all of that. I was going across that, and I got almost across, and my foot slipped or something. Anyhow, pretty soon I was down in the water, and there was a kid down there bathing. He said, "What'd you do that for? You cross this river every day." Well, my sun helmet was floating down the river, so he got it for me. The Lord was good. At the other end of the bridge, where I didn't fall in, there was a deep hole. Had I gone in there, it would have been the end of me. I went up this high, because I can't swim. These things happen. Another time I was out on a bicycle, going along very much concerned about a young man at Kanjanpur that was really giving us a lot of trouble. I was praying for that fellow. The road I was going on was perfectly level. There were no goats running across the road or anything. And all of a sudden, my cycle twitched and I had fallen to the ground. I said it was the devil, because I was praying for that fellow. Anyhow, I got up and I wasn't hurt. Looked around, I didn't see anybody was seeing me. Dusted off, got on my bicycle, and kept on going. I'm still praying for that fellow. But I cycled lots and lots of miles.
What's the story about you and the tin roofs, Rhoda?
Well, when the work was first started there, the buildings were bamboo buildings with straw roofs. But that was rather temporary. And so then we got to having mud buildings with tin roofs. The Covers had built some of these. But we were needing more. As the churches grew, we needed more of these buildings. And at first, the school and the church was held in the same building. Well, it didn't seem like a church building, it didn't seem like a school building. So I was advocating that we have a separate church building, just a one-room building. So our plan was, if the church put up the mud walls, and they could do that free labor, that was they were special in that. If they would put up the mud walls and supply the door and the windows and level off the floor, then the mission would give the bamboo ceiling and the rafters and the tin roof. That took money, but friends back home are so good, especially my church at Maytown. I got birthday presents and I got Christmas presents, and that all went into tin roofs. And over the years, I put 16 roofs on church buildings. Besides that, we put some on school buildings and some on staff quarters. That was great.
It's amazing to me how that you missionaries get gifts, and they end up in tin roofs, and they end up in medicine for local people. It's really a challenge to our hearts. Well, Rhoda, was there a camp program?
Yes, I had my first furlough in 1950-51, and I got to camp that year. And I just remembered all the good things that had happened, because it was at camp, when I was only a junior in high school, that I dedicated myself to the Lord. And shortly after that, I heard the Lord's call. And so I said, why can't we have camp? And there was a man out there who was a children's special service mission worker. And we were able to get his services for a number of years. He would come to us about a week. And first we started out just with the young people's camp. Then the camp grew because the youngsters from the village churches came in, and those from Bogra came over. Some of the youngsters walked 3 to 8 miles, and they had to bring their bedding and their clothes for that week. Then the camp grew, and so we had a big girls' camp, sent them home. Then we had the big boys' camp, sent them home, and then the junior boys and girls came in. So we were having 3 very successful camps with Bible lessons and song lessons, and they loved all these new songs, Bible quizzes, fun time, and then camp always closed with a consecration time or a time for accepting the Lord. And many of the people look back to that camp as the time when they accepted the Lord. But 1971, we had the war. Attitudes and everything else changed, and we dropped the camp program.
You mentioned the war in 1971, the war in East Pakistan. Where were you during that time?
I had gone home in December of 70 for my furlough, and the unrest began in March. And Lois told that story about them having to flee with the millions of refugees that went over to India. Just about all of our people went over too. Dr. Gilbert and Mary White were there in Bogra, and most of the staff in Bogra. That's 40 miles from the border. Kanjipur's only 8 miles from the border. So they went. In July of that year, Hakim Dewan died suddenly with heart attack. And then in August, Dr. Gilbert asked if I would return, and I did by the end of October, or by the end of August. And I just felt it's better to be there and be part of it than to worry and wonder what's going on all the time anyhow. So I got there, and it was a difficult time. Wars are terrible. We spent the last 3 days in trenches. I tried to say Bible verses. All I could think of was the 23rd Psalm. I knew a lot more, but that's all that came to my mind at that time. But anyhow, December the 16th, the peace was signed, and we were pretty happy to have peace at last. And now I could say I was living in the same house in 3 countries, because it was India when I went, and then East Pakistan, now in the same house. It was now Bangladesh.
Missionaries talk about you, Rhoda, living in the same house but 3 different countries. And that's a rather interesting story, too. Why did 10 people visit the mission in 1973?
Well, if you do a little arithmetic, 48 plus 25 is 1973. And so this was this golden, or the diamond jubilee. And our mission conference of the churches was now 25 years old. So we made big banners and everything. One side of the gate said 75th anniversary, and the other side of the gate said 25th. And the people back home had to be part of that. Eunice Kaplan was part of it. She had fled, you see, from East Pakistan during the war. She was only allowed to stay in India a short time, then she and Lois had to go home. But Eunice was part of the 10. They came back to celebrate the Jubilee. And Eunice got a chance to go to all the village churches to see everybody again. It was a wonderful time for her. And then in that 10 was Dot and Wilmer Andrew. And while they were there, or shortly after, they felt the Lord's call to return. And so they came out and helped us. But there were 10 in all. And we had a great time. They were in the Kanjampur area during Thanksgiving. And I said, we're going to celebrate. They had one hard day out in the villages. And that evening we had our Thanksgiving dinner. Good burgers. And they never forget that. We had a great time. 2 men of our national preachers were ordained at the time of the 75th Jubilee. And that was very meaningful to all of us. And all the preachers that were in the group, the American fellows, they could put their hands on the laying on of hands when the ordination was taking place.
Rhoda, you've mentioned a lot of our American missionaries that were over there at that time. And now I'm thinking only Linda Kelleher Bishosh is left in Bangladesh. There's been a nationalization of the mission work in Kanjampur. Do you want to tell us about that?
Nationalization is a good thing. Nationalization is working yourself out of a job and allowing the nationals to do it. And they are better qualified, really. And they have no worries about visas. They have no worries about getting used to this kind of culture and all of that. And the bugs and the germs and all those things that we have to accommodate. Anyhow, as soon as Linda got there and had the language, then she began preparing and teaching village health workers. And they were having little clinics out in the villages. Because Dr. Brenneman had said years before, 90% of the people I see can be taken care of by a paramedical. Only 10% really need a qualified doctor. And so Linda was preparing people to take care of these 90% cases. And when they received their certificates, the doctor kept saying again and again, now remember, you just take care of the things that you've been taught. If you have a difficult case, bring them into Kanjampur. And the doctors came from Bogra about once a week. So the work was going on like that. That was fine for the medical. And the Shanga was taking care of the churches. I still was doing the schoolwork. By this time, there was some restrictions in the border area. Kanjampur, like I say, is 8 miles from the border, but the government had said this area 5 miles wide from the border, and we're right on the Indian border, you see. So this 5-mile area was restricted to foreigners. Our village schools, every last one, and most of the churches are in that 5-mile area. So for years I received a permit to travel there and work there. And then the government refused to give that permit. Why? I don't know. Anyhow, they didn't give it, so I couldn't go. But it was good. It was God forcing us to do what we should have been doing. And so field council said, okay, we'll put Mr. Shomer Merendi in as the man in charge of the village schools and take care of the maintenance of the village properties, of the mission properties out in the villages. So we did that. And he did very well. He'd been teaching for 15 years. He knew all the people out there. He's a tribal man, and most of the churches are tribal people. So he did a very fine job. Then after 4 years of my being restricted, I was given a permit again. I think it was because the district was divided. Jaiprahat now became a separate district. We had our own superintendent of police, whose daughter was in our boarding school. So when I asked him for privileges, he felt inclined to do it. He said, you may go, but don't stay overnight. I used to go out on Tuesday and come back Sunday. But now I could make day trips, and that was wonderful. I could still see the people, have women's meetings, children's meetings, or whatever, but Shom was carrying on the other work in the schools. It was great.
Was there any Bible verse or perhaps some Bible verses that were meaningful to you while you were serving?
Yes. I told you when I was in the trench, I knew lots of Bible verses, but only the 23rd Psalm came to me. We were in that trench 3 days. It was awful. There were some other verses, lots of them, that I have marked in my Bengali and English Bibles. Isaiah 55:11. My word shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please. I remember Mrs. Culver used to talk about the seed sowing, and I have done lots of seed sowing. I remember Eunice Kaplan telling about them camping near Pahananda before I got there, early in the 40s. I want you to know a big group of people were baptized in that area 50 years later. So I have hopes to believe that the seed that I had sown out there will also bring harvest someday. 1 John 4:4. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. When there are difficulties, you really claim that verse. Because Satan does attack. I told you how I fell off that bicycle that day. I'm sure it was Satan. I never had any experience like that before or since. But God is greater. 2 Kings 19:14. Hezekiah received the letter and read it and spread it out before the Lord. I use this formula every time. Sometimes we got bad letters. Sometimes we got letters that hurt you. I just took that letter literally and opened my Bible to this very verse and spread it out before the Lord. And we prayed. And some people came to me with letters that they had received, nasty ones, threatening letters. I even had one letter one time that said, have so much money ready and be prepared to die, and tell Linda too. Well, we spread it out before the Lord. Nothing happened. Lamentations 3:22-23. It is because of the Lord's mercy that we are not consumed, because his compassions are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. And I proved that again and again. Oh, I didn't tell you, I got back home again. In January and February of this year, after being home 3 years, I had saved my money and I went back home on vacation. And it was so good to see everybody. I thought I'd cycle again every place like I had before. But you know, they had those awful floods in 87 and 88. The floods in 87 was from rain that fell right there in Kanjipur area. The floods of 88 were waters that came in from Nepal and India. Those big rivers start up in the mountains of Nepal and India, come rushing down through. We are about 150 miles from the big rivers. So the bad floods were not in our area. Those big rivers come down through the central part of the country, touch Dhaka and those places that we saw on TV, and it was terrible. We saw places where bridges were completely washed out, but we got there in January, and that was a dry season, so we just took a detour by the side, where the bridges were only actually, short things over rainy season creeks and like that. But we saw much damage, and the roads up our places were in a bad condition. Very sandy, some places very bad. Of course, the sugar mill was in operation, but the men told me the roads were in a bad condition because of the floods. So anyhow, I couldn't cycle. I tried it. I went one place. The man who bought my cycle said I could borrow it back, and he had it all fixed up, and I used it. It was only a 6-mile trip, but I had to push the bike about half the way because of the sand. So then, Bimal Tudu, one of the young pastors, the mission bought 3 motorcycles for these men that had the long trips to make, and they now have Yamahas. And so Bimal took me to these 26 places on the motorcycle. Now, I never ever would drive a motorcycle. I had no objections to riding one. So I borrowed Linda's helmet, and I borrowed her long pants, and I had a big baggy dress to wear. We had a great time. Got to see everybody.
Rhoda Kauffman served as a missionary from 1944 to 1986. As she told you, she took a trip back home in January and February of 1989. She calls that home because she spent more years of her life in Bangladesh area than she has in her own hometown of Maytown. While Rhoda is retired now, she maintains an active speaking schedule, and she works in her home church, the Maytown Church of God.